Hey, welcome to Live with Buckeye Grove. We are here a little bit more than 24 hours away from the Sugar Bowl. I am your host, Kevin Noon. I'm joined by Marcus Horton, Jacob Binge. Griffin Strom will be with us shortly. He is trying to find somewhere with a little better internet. Griffin and I are both in New Orleans, while Marcus and Jacob are holding down the home fort back in the state of Ohio. Um, a lot of excitement going, building up for this game. Unfortunately, we're only going to see about 3,000 fans in the stands, but, this really is shaping up to be the marquee game probably in advance of the championship game, just based on how the bowl schedule is shaped up and what's left.
Yeah, I think Ryan Day said it more than a few times. You couldn't have drawn up a better story here. It's the rematch, of course. Two of the best quarterbacks in the country. Everyone knows what happened with the coaches poll with Dabo. I mean, there's just so many storylines going on right now. I don't think that someone could have written up a better story than a rematch here after everything Ohio State has been through. Clemson, not as much, but Ryan Day he keeps hammering it home like this is what we wanted. This is what we wanted a year ago. This is what we wanted as soon as we left the field against Clemson last year. So I mean, it's perfect.
It's beyond perfect, man. I'm ready for this next chapter. This is the reason why they kept that score up when they're practicing or in the weight room. They're reminded of it daily. And it took a lot of challenges to overcome to get here. Maybe some doubt from the outside and more or less games, what have you. But even still, Ohio State stayed the course. They took care of business, and now they find themselves right where they wanted to be, just like Ryan Day and the rest of the guys said. You got Clemson right there in front of them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's kind of a chance for redemption, but, words like redemption and revenge, we all love to throw them around, but the goal is just to win this game. I mean, you've got to win this game, prolong the season, have an opportunity to take on the winner of the Rose Bowl between Alabama and Notre Dame. Only 4 teams have a chance at a national championship at this point. Ohio State is one of them. Certainly a large hurdle in front of the Buckeyes right now with the talented Clemson team. I'm kind of watching Griffin as he's walking through the hotel lobby right now, trying to find somewhere to sidle up. I'm going to try and hold off before I get into specific questions until he finds somewhere to sit down. But, as we're going live right now, my understanding is the Buckeyes have not taken off from Columbus quite yet. Sizable weather front moving through the country right now. A lot of rain, a lot of wind in the state of Louisiana right now. And the way that the schedule was planned was that Ohio State would get in, immediately go to the Superdome, go through a walkthrough, go to their hotel, be in for the night, go to the game, and then come home. But, they may get in a tick later based on everything now. And there's Griffin. We welcome him into the show.
Hey, what's going on?
I guess right now, Griffin, you've been in New Orleans with me here for a couple days in advance of the game. Just, a lot on the line right now for Ohio State with this game coming up.
Oh, yeah. And, we had our head coach's press conference this morning, obviously. A little bit of Ryan Day versus Dabo Swinney storyline kind of continuing with the questions today about whether or not he was bothered by Dabo ranking Ohio State 11th. Is it loud down here?
A little loud. Just keep going.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to try to get a slightly better spot here. I'm sorry.
You don't have a number, do you?
Well, while Griffin is doing that, let me jump off of the isolated view there. That's the challenge. We're sharing a room here, and it just doesn't work with us sitting 6 feet apart from one another, just with what's going on. But it seems like we're having a party down in the lobby right now. It is New Year's Eve in New Orleans, but yeah, the joys of live streaming services. But to dovetail off of what Griffin was saying, everybody wanted to talk about Dabo's Amway coaches poll ballot with the 11, voting him 11th. I mean, he certainly made, a compelling argument of what his thoughts were, but it certainly is a difference to some of the things he was saying early in the season when it appeared maybe Clemson could run into a bit of an interrupted schedule.
Yes, it did. It did. I mean, I've seen on Twitter, I don't want to be the Twitter guy, but I've seen more than a few people saying if Clemson was in this situation, if Clemson had played 6 games, Dabo would be advocating for his team. And we've seen Ryan Day say that too. He said everyone wants to make the case for their team. He understands everyone's points. He's being very diplomatic about it. He's being the good Ohio State coach instead of the outspoken Dabo. But everyone wants to talk about the number 11 thing. And I think what comes to my mind is what Sean Wade said when the media talked to him. He said he was asked about characterizing the rivalry, and he said, I'd characterize it as we've never beat Clemson yet. And I think a lot of that gets lost in the whole rivalry and the drama unfolding is that Ohio State has to beat Clemson, and that's just one step. There's still another game left. Like, this isn't it. There's still another step after this, and Ohio State has not beat Clemson yet. And I think that's what the focus needs to be on here.
I kind of agree. It's funny. Should Dabo have even, added fuel to the fire by putting Ohio State as 11th? Just looking at the schedule here, Clemson's played the same number of games as Ohio State since November 7th. So, I take that into account more so than, Clemson playing 11 games and Ohio State only 6, just because, I think Ohio State's gotten into a rhythm of playing every other week. That Ryan Day has the rest of the team motivated to get into a routine to where they can avenge and get this redemption that's been probably one of the biggest talking points that we've heard from the team, just this week.
Yeah, exactly. So do you want to sit there and do you want to poke the bear in terms of where Ohio State's at? I mean, and I don't remember which one of you, but one of you wrote a story where one of the players had said, the disrespect card. I mean, we're seeing the disrespect card being played, and whether or not that's truthful or not, it doesn't matter if it's truthful. If you believe it and you're able to draw from it, I think that's what matters.
Yeah, I think it was Wyatt Davis that said that he felt like, Ohio State was coming into this game without any respect at all. And Garrett Wilson kind of dovetailed off of that as well, saying that, Dabo Swinney's comments kind of added fuel to the fire. But I think a lot of the, so Ryan Day was basically saying today that stuff really doesn't matter all that much. It's more of a media storyline, if you will, at this point, because do you really need that extra motivation when you're already playing in a game that has such high stakes? However, we have seen Ohio State, kind of have lackadaisical halves where you might question their motivation throughout the season. Now, will that be remedied by the fact that now you're playing Clemson, a much higher, a stiffer competition, if you will? But that remains to be seen.
Let's jump right into it. Go ahead. I was just going to set us up to start talking about Ohio State's pass offense against Clemson pass defense and get into our first question. But go ahead, Marcus. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I just wanted to add, like, as Griffin said, will it stiffen up against Clemson? Will the level of play rise to the competition? I wanted to say, like, it has to rise because this game, we've seen what Clemson has done in the past weeks. In the last few weeks, they're really pulling it together. I think the level of competition certainly is rising, and Ohio State's level of play needs to rise if they want to stick with Clemson here early.
Exactly. And as I've said in pieces, Ohio State, is certainly not played a lot of football here in the last month plus, just based on how the schedule's gone and whatnot. I mean, I guess thankfully it was only a 12 or 13 day build up from Selection Sunday to when they're playing versus, we've seen at points of the college football playoff era, it take almost a month. I mean, we've seen longer than a month during the BCS era and whatnot. And, now they're able to kind of get to it. Certainly enough time, we hope, for Ohio State to be able to go in with as close to a full repertoire of weapons. And I think when we're talking about weapons that Ohio State, sorely was missing against Northwestern, we have to start with Chris Olave. And I think that's a perfect segue into Ohio State's pass offense against the Clemson pass defense. And I'll open it up to everybody by talking about Justin Fields and the issues that maybe he's had, and maybe the unfair statements that have said that he had like this bad game against Indiana. He had a bad half against Indiana, but you just don't get up 35-7 by just, happenstance. The Northwestern game certainly not one that he's going to put on his resume reel. But what are your thoughts about how Justin Fields needs to approach this game?
Well, I think it's just really kind of coming off of the Big Ten championship game. It's kind of a shock to a lot of people based on how Ohio State began the season that we would now be to a point where we would be questioning the Ohio State pass offense in general. I think a lot of people, thought that was really the identity of this team. Kind of in year two of Justin Fields, who was really going to, we're going to open up the playbook in the pass offense was kind of the thought that everyone was coming into the season with. And then when you saw how well Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson played in tandem as those two top receiving options for Justin Fields, it was like, man, you can't stop these guys, and no one's going to be able to stop the Ohio State pass offense. And then what you saw is you took Chris Olave out of the mix in the last game, and that seemed to have a major effect. And who knows? You can't really say, if Chris Olave was in the game, would it have been much different? We don't really know that. It'll obviously, we'll get the answer to see, if there is a major, bounce back once he is reinserted into that lineup. But it's just really, it was really an alarming thing to see. I think in a game where a lot of people were expecting Ohio State to have really a showcase performance and put it all together because, the selection show was going to be the next day. And that's a huge storyline going into this game. What is Justin Fields going to look like?
Yeah, I can kind of follow up on that a little bit. Just, we heard from Garrett Wilson earlier this week who said he's never played a game without Chris Olave. And, the statistics show that Ohio State had their lowest receiving yards in a game this season against Northwestern. And so with Olave's impending return, I see the offense opening up a ton because, against the Wildcats, they were able to focus on Garrett Wilson with the rest of the wide receivers being almost non-existent because I still think Jameson Williams, Julian Fleming, and the rest of the freshmen are still pretty raw in development. But with Olave in there, you get a deep ball threat that can really torch opposing defensive secondaries. I kind of was counting some stats, and he's got like 7 catches of 20-plus yards. If he gets downfield, he'll really turn on his boosters, and he's really a trustworthy option for Justin Fields.
Yeah, kind of going off of that, we all know Northwestern's whole defensive scheme against Ohio State and in the season is taking away those big plays. And while Garrett Wilson is certainly a big play threat, Chris Olave has been that guy this season for Ohio State. He's been the one making the touchdown catches, making the deep plays, breaking the field wide open. And I think without him, like Jacob said, Northwestern was able to completely lock in on Garrett Wilson and prevent him from going deep, prevent him from making those explosive plays, and force Ohio State to drive down the field, which kind of maybe threw Justin Fields for a loop there because Justin Fields likes to mix in those deep shots. He certainly is effective in short routes, but he likes to mix in the deep shots to Olave. And without that comforting presence there of Olave and his speed down the field, I think it really took away. Now, I don't want to say an entire dimension of Ohio State's offense, but it certainly took away a large chunk of Ohio State's effectiveness in the passing game.
And I think when you look at what Northwestern's plan was, it was to make Ohio State beat the Wildcats with the run game. And ultimately that's what happened. They're just with that cover 4 shell, there weren't a lot of opportunities to be able to have that vertical passing game that has been there at other points during the season. I guess maybe the concern is that Ohio State was a little stubborn, if you will, in terms of finally saying, okay, well, we're going to put this game in the hands and on the legs of Trey Sermon. And when you sit there and you see that he had 271 rushing yards in the second half after having 60 in the first half, and even with that, some of the success in the second half, Trey Sermon would run it for 45 yards, and then they would go pass, punt, or pass, field goal. And, I can understand the level of frustration some people saw there. Ohio State won the game, and that's what you needed to do. And as I had said in a previous show, Ohio State was getting in the college football playoff with a 1-point win or a 100-point win. Honestly, hindsight now, I would have thought it would have been closer to a 100-point win than a 1-point win.
Yeah, most definitely. I think I agree with you that Ohio State would have made it either way, but that game I know left a bad taste in a lot of our mouths and in a lot of the players' mouths, especially with the selection show being the next day. And I think especially considering the way Clemson played in the ACC championship the same day. I mean, you saw Ohio State go out and struggle in the first half, struggle to beat the Northwestern defense. Credit to the Northwestern defense, but Ohio State struggled against a team it probably should have beat by a lot more. And Clemson came out and took full revenge on a team that beat it earlier in the season. And everything clicked for Clemson. I mean, it held Notre Dame to 44 rushing yards. Trevor Lawrence is back and ticking. I just think Ohio State's performance wasn't up to its standards, but combine that with Clemson's effort against Notre Dame, and it really adds up to what we're seeing here with the underdog mentality of Ohio State and Clemson being favored here.
I'm going to jump into Dalton's question. I posted it a couple times, but maybe now we can address it, and we've kind of talked around it. Do you think that with Nolan Turner missing the first half of the game due to a targeting call in the ACC championship game, do they take the deep shots with Olave and Wilson, or do you sit there and slow it down? Maybe keep it in Sermon's hands, or how do you think you approach it at that point when probably one of the most veteran players on the Clemson defense will not be out there for the first 30 minutes?
I think Ohio State does typically like to throw an early shot downfield that kind of aligns with Ryan Day's philosophy on, staying aggressive. He keeps talking about that. Even though the run game has been popping for them recently, they have to stay aggressive to keep the Clemson or any opposing defense on its heels in the secondary to kind of open up the run game. And I think certainly, with the starting safety being out in the first half, I think Ohio State would look to do that. However, I don't know. The only thing there is that with Justin Fields' confidence as of late, potentially being a little shakier, does he feel comfortable opening up with something like that, or does he need to see a couple, free throws go in, if you will, to get his rhythm going in the game? I think a huge emphasis was on if you're missing those tight ends against Western. It was like a lot of times you see him pull onto the ball, get flushed out of the pocket, either get sacked or something bad happening outside of the pocket. And you're looking at the replay going, oh man, he had Jeremy Ruckert, he had Luke Farrell wide open underneath. Why is he not making that read? And so I don't know if maybe there's more of an emphasis on that early on or not. That remains to be seen. But I definitely think Ohio State will take a downfield shot early on.
I agree 100%. Just kind of looking at, the notes, Ohio State scored a touchdown on, their first five games on the first possession. And, against Northwestern, there was a field goal on their first offensive possession. So clearly Ohio State wants to get ahead quickly and get points on the scoreboard. And how unfortunate for Clemson, because Nolan Turner's targeting call came when they were up by a mile late or midway through the fourth quarter. And his presence in the Clemson secondary is going to be huge when he returns in the second half. So if Ohio State, I think for me, momentum is the key. So if Ohio State, sees that, taking those deep shots is clicking, why not just keep, pounding it, when it's, favorable. But Clemson also has a great run defense. So I'm sure, if that slows down, Sermon, Teague, Ohio State on the ground, well, then, you can go back to passing the ball.
Yeah, Clemson it's hard to say like what Clemson is bad at, because they're not bad at anything, and they have been even better at everything late. But I think Ryan Day is going to stay aggressive. As Griffin said, he's talked about that all season long. When the passing game wasn't working, he's stuck to it. He said you need to have that in order to have a successful offense. So I think we'll see early how effective the Clemson pass rush can be, because they have a multitude of guys who can attack. And if Justin Fields is forced out of the pocket and is scrambling early, like we've seen in games past, I'm not sure how many deep shots Ohio State can afford to take before Justin Fields gets knocked down. But I think they certainly they have to be aggressive early to keep up with the Clemson offense. They can't just pound away with Trey Sermon, because Clemson saw what happens when they do that, and they're going to be ready for Trey Sermon.
I want to quickly thank our travel partner, Steamboat Dry Goods. You can see their URL down there in our scroll at the bottom. Great Buckeye-owned, Buckeye-run business. So give them a shout out and check them out at Steamboat Dry Goods. Let's jump over to, stay on the Ohio State offensive side of things and look at the rush offense. And we kind of talked about that a little bit. Ohio State coming off of a 331 day by Trey Sermon, I don't think anybody's expecting anybody to rush for 300 yards as an individual in this game. But go back to 2019, and J.K. Dobbins came out and had a really good game until he got dinged up. And then once Ohio State lost its rushing attack, things changed a little bit there. Ohio State probably a little deeper at running back this year. I mean, they don't have J.K. Dobbins, obviously. But, Trey Sermon came out and had a good game last week. He's getting stronger as the season goes on. Obviously, you still have Master Teague. We don't know if he's still a little dinged up after leaving the game. Mayan Williams, Steele Chambers. And then you look on the other side at Clemson, and I struggle to think of a lot of great backs that Clemson has gone against this year. I mean, honestly, the only back that comes to my mind when I'm thinking about the ACC is the one that lines up for Clemson and Travis Etienne. So it'll be interesting to see what Clemson is able to do in terms of trying to slow down the Ohio State run game, if the Buckeyes are going to be able to get out there and set the pace there, and if it's going to be a run-to-pass type of offense, a pass-to-run type of offense, or what it's going to look like, I guess.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people kind of think that, Trey Sermon's huge record-setting day against Northwestern kind of came out of nowhere. And it did when you look at his, cumulative yardage and whatnot. But if you actually have watched the games and looked at the Ohio State, run game up front, and in particular Trey Sermon's production in it, his season, he really started to find a rhythm really halfway through the season. Even though he wasn't getting the carries, he was getting still many less carries than Master Teague, as they've kind of they had been going with Teague as their number one option at running back for much of the season. But he's kind of gotten his rhythm down for really the back half of the season in general. And you could very much envision him having the hot hand right now going forward, especially with Master Teague kind of going down with an undisclosed injury of some sort of Big Ten championship game. The issue is you still don't feel nearly as confident in the playmaking abilities of Trey Sermon necessarily in compared to a J.K. Dobbins last year. While even though Dobbins had a couple gaffes that kind of cost Ohio State touchdowns that could have put him up early, he ended up with 170 yards in that game. I mean, they really needed J.K. Dobbins to kind of carry the load early, while Justin Fields was kind of dealing with some a little bit of inaccuracy and just kind of jitters early on in that big stage in the last game. The problem is this year, if you're dealing with kind of a shaky performance from Justin Fields, as we've seen in the last few games, will you be able to rely on Trey Sermon in the same way that you were a J.K. Dobbins last year? The blocking up front has gotten a lot better, so maybe we will see that. Clemson is still I think they're the number 9 team against the rush in the country. Like you said, they haven't necessarily faced the nation's best running backs or best rush offenses, but it'll certainly be. I have no idea how it's going to look. Who's going to win that matchup up front.
I'll kind of just build up on that because the Trey Sermon story came out today. He did rush for 48 yards in every game this season, so he's quietly been consistent. And the college football playoff isn't an unfamiliar stage to him because he's played twice there for Oklahoma when he was a Sooner, and so maybe he can step up in clutch moments because we saw him step up in the Big Ten title game. He got that monkey off his back when he scored against Michigan State, and now his confidence has got to be as high as it's been all season. He's finally settled in. He knows, okay, I know where the offensive line is going to move. He said that this week. Getting to learn, where Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis are going to move on certain blocks and whatnot are going to pave the way for Sermon to explode. And so, with this Clemson rush defense having the second most sacks, in the nation, the pressure is going to be there. Now, have they faced an offensive line like Ohio State? Maybe, maybe not. But, with confidence high as ever, Ohio State's going to want to come in and pound the run game to see, okay, if they can ride with it for the rest of the Sugar Bowl. But if not, I have to see them, pounding the passing game.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with Griffin on this, that it's really hard to tell right now how the run game is going to look for 2 reasons. One being Clemson hasn't really played an offensive line or a rushing attack like Ohio State has shown at times this season. I think the biggest test for them would have been North Carolina with Williams and Carter in the backfield, but they didn't play North Carolina. So they really haven't faced that explosive potential that Trey Sermon showed. I think maybe some combination of Kyron Williams and Ian Book were the best running backs that Clemson has seen this season, and Ian Book is Notre Dame's quarterback. So you don't really know because they've played more games, as we know, as Dabo said, but they haven't played that kind of potential that Ohio State has in the backfield. And I say potential because we don't know about Ohio State either. I mean, Northwestern had a great rush defense, and Trey Sermon just tore through it. So if that Trey Sermon shows up, if the Master Teague shows up that just bullies people and has a little bit of burst, then it could easily flip Ohio State's way. But if Clemson is for real and that run defense they showed against Notre Dame in the ACC championship can sustain against a completely different team, then it could easily go Clemson's way. I mean, it's probably the thing that's most up in the air this game, and the thing that might define this game in its early stages.
Yeah, as I look at the numbers, as I posted Tail of the Tape earlier today, they've gone against a couple of top 25 rush offenses, with Notre Dame being 21st and Virginia Tech being 11th. And Virginia Tech was able to rush for 131 yards and a touchdown, but it took Virginia Tech 45 carries. And then, of course, Notre Dame, they played the two games. And coming out of the ACC championship game, that was 30 carries, 44 yards, and a score. But the first time around was 41 carries for 209 and 3 scores. We know that Clemson was not 100% in terms of having all of its dudes for that first Notre Dame game. But I do think it shows that there is the potential of them to be had a little bit there. Will Ohio State be able to walk through that door? Will they be able to open that door and walk through it? I guess we're going to have to wait and kind of see there. But, I think that there certainly is the potential for Ohio State to be able to have some success on the ground, to be able to keep Trevor Lawrence standing next to Dabo Swinney and maybe take a couple possessions out of this game. Maybe not so much intentionally by saying we're just going to try and really stall this game down. But, I think that I certainly wouldn't want Clemson having, being down a score or something with 6 minutes to go and a full complement of timeouts. If you can sit there and chew up some clock, I think that's a good thing. But, go ahead.
I don't know if you guys mentioned this at all, but just and not to hijack this if you had a natural flow or rundown of things going on, but I would think that Ohio State would, as someone that's following Ohio State, if I'm looking at it through Ohio State's perspective, hearing Dabo Swinney say that only 2 players didn't make the trip, when one of them being a walk-on, you're like, man, we're getting the full, the number ones. You know what I mean? They're not gonna. Whereas I think we're all expecting to see some unavailable names for Ohio State and potentially a couple of them in, being key contributors. I don't think, it's necessarily great for Ohio State just to hear that you might be getting a full strength Clemson team.
But one person that they won't have will be their offensive coordinator, Tony Elliott, who tested positive for COVID and will not be available for this game. It's going to create a little bit of a shuffle. We can kind of go into the Clemson offense either with pass or rush, but either way you look at it, they're not going to have their play caller. That doesn't mean that he hasn't been preparing them. That doesn't mean they can't have phone conversations up until pretty much the point that the game starts. They can't have a sheet of, in case of emergency, run these 10 plays. I mean, it's a veteran offense with Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne and Amari Rodgers. But it still has to be impactful, I would think.
Yeah, it will be impactful, but I mean, Trevor Lawrence can turn a sack into a 60-yard touchdown in 5 seconds. Travis Etienne hasn't been the Travis Etienne we've seen for his first 3 years, but he's still a playmaker through the air, more than ever through the air and on the ground. There certainly will be an impact, and I think you might see it earlier in the game as Clemson still figures out life without its offensive coordinator. But when you get to the college football playoff, the talent is there to make plays, no matter who's calling the plays, right? I mean, most of the best plays are made when it's kind of a create your own play situation. That's where Trevor Lawrence's best plays have come from. That's where his highlight tape comes from. So I think while there will be an impact, possibly early, without its comfort with its offensive coordinator, I think you'll start to see those veterans come out and those playmakers come out for Clemson and start to take over if things aren't going perfectly.
Yeah, I kind of agree a little bit. I think Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne are really going to lead that offensive front with their leadership. I don't think the loss of Tony Elliott is going to hurt Clemson too much. You know, they've had great success in his 10 years there. And that just might be the underlying storyline of this game. You know, Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne's leadership just might pave the way for Clemson, you know, in a favorable direction. But last year, T. Higgins and Justin Ross, you know, had a bit more impact, you know, in the receiving game. So if Trevor Lawrence has to, you know, create a play per se, you know, he won't have those guys this year. And so he's going to have to rely on that Cornell Powell and then Amari Rodgers, you know, in the receiving game, who weren't as big of a factor last year as they may be this year.
And yeah, I'll just add that I don't think no matter what happens in this game, I don't think, honestly, you're going to look back on it in 10 years and, you know, a cliff note of any priority is going to be, oh, well, Clemson didn't have its offensive coordinator. I just don't think that that's going to really honestly factor into the point that that's, you know, a headline after the game, no matter what happens. Because, you know, you've got some of the best, you know, minds in college football on these, you know, programs, and especially at Clemson. And you can't kind of just, you know, there's just so much that goes into the game planning and everything. Like, think about even Ohio State, you know, playing Michigan State without Ryan Day, their main play caller. And yes, they had Kevin Wilson still, you know, there on the headset and whatnot. But did we really notice that much of a difference in kind of the play calling, or was that, you know, really even part of it thinking, you know, Ryan Day would have called something differently? I don't think that it's going to be as big of a kind of making it out to be.
Yeah. All right. Well, I was going to say we're getting hit a little bit by the internet here at this hotel, kind of kicking in and kicking out. Apologies for anything that kind of freezes up on y'all who are watching. Again, you know, this is live with BuckeyeGrove.com, and this edition is brought to you by our good friends at Steamboat Dry Goods. Check them out on the scroll below. If you enter code BYE2020, you can get up to 40% off select items. Again, that is Steamboat Dry Goods. You know, let's jump right into talking about what I think everybody wants to, and that is Trevor Lawrence, the passer, against this Ohio State defense. And, you know, Lawrence has proven that he may be the Heisman winner. I mean, especially if Alabama finds a way to where it splits its votes split up, and you know, they all kind of go amongst various guys. Trevor Lawrence easily could go in. He's got the numbers there. Doesn't have a T. Higgins, Justin Ross type of situation as much. Amari Rodgers really good. Cornell Powell's come on as of late, had some big numbers there. Obviously, the Ohio State pass defense has kind of been feast or famine, and we remember famine a lot more than we remember feast. You know, what are your thoughts on how Ohio State's going to have to try and, you know, slay this dragon?
I think it's just the biggest question overall in this game that everyone kind of has. It's the Ohio State secondary, which was entering the season and continues to be, you know, the biggest question about the team in general. They lost, you know, those first round draft picks, and, you know, even Jordan Fuller, the guy that wasn't a first round draft pick, might be the you know, the best pro player right now of the bunch. You've got questions at secondary. You've still got some health issues at secondary potentially with you know, Marcus Hooker missing last game, and even some of the backup guys, and then you have Josh Hooker kind of playing that center fielder safety position that he hadn't played all season up until that point in the Northwestern game. And then at cornerback, I think a lot of people on the outside are going to say, okay, you got Shaun Wade, he's a first-team All-American, you know, the Big Ten's defensive back of the year. But a lot of the people that have really been following Ohio State closely all season, you know, kind of saw some of those accolades and kind of said, well, I don't think he had that great of a season, to be honest with you, Shaun Wade, in terms of what he's done in the past, and in terms of even what we saw Damon Arnett and Jeff Okudah do on the outside last season. And then besides that, you have Sevyn Banks, He's kind of been hit or miss at times. Marcus Williamson in the slot has been a question as well. He's another first-year starter. And against this Clemson pass game, this is the biggest question to me. And we haven't necessarily seen Ohio State improve that because they haven't really been tested in the pass game all that much, if we're being honest, since we saw them play Indiana. Because Michigan State, I mean, the quarterback that was playing for Michigan State just transferred, to a much, out of the Big Ten into a much smaller school in Rocky Lombardi. And then Peyton Ramsey, for Northwestern, they had like the second worst pass game in the entire conference coming into that game. And while he did have success early on, I don't think that's not a comparable threat in the pass game to what Trevor Lawrence and Clemson can provide. And I think that this is just it's the number one kind of the headline question coming into this game.
I think so, 100% as well. That was my question going into today's story was, will Trevor Lawrence recognize the Ohio State secondary just because there was so much turnover from the Fiesta Bowl last year to the Sugar Bowl this year? You do got Sean Wade coming back, being the Big Ten Defensive Back of the Year. He has that experience going up against Trevor Lawrence. And, he's going to play with an extra vigor because he didn't get to finish it out last year and, have that note that he wanted to end the game on last year at all. And so it was something that he talked about a few weeks ago going into the Big Ten title game, was telling the rest of his secondary to just play with confidence, be themselves, stay consistent. And with the inexperience that Sevyn Banks, Marcus Hooker, Josh Proctor, and Marcus Williamson bring into this game, big question mark. It's going to be a big test because, like as Griffin said, they really haven't been tested since Michael Penix Jr., threw so many yards against them about a month ago. So Trevor Lawrence, obviously great talent. He's going to have some options in the wide receiving game, but like I mentioned earlier, he doesn't have T. Higgins, doesn't have Justin Ross, so could be just as much of a question mark too on the Clemson side.
I'll be honest. In the staff predictions coming out tomorrow, I did pick Clemson to win. I think Trevor Lawrence and the passing game might be the anvil that falls on Ohio State. We heard Sean Wade say when he talked to the media, he said, Indiana had a great quarterback. Trevor Lawrence is just another great quarterback. Trevor Lawrence is not Michael Penix Jr. He's a lot better than Michael Penix Jr. He's going to find a way to pick apart the Ohio State defense. I mean, that much is true. One of the Ohio State defenders said Tuesday that you can't really stop Trevor Lawrence in this offense. You can only slow them down. And I think that's going to have to be the key here. I mean, you saw Michael Penix just torch Ohio State secondary with deep plays. And that can't happen. That can't happen because Clemson and Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne are going to make big plays on the ground too. And if Trevor Lawrence is able to pick apart Ohio State through the air and make those deep plays, make those big touchdowns, I mean, Ohio State's season has been defined by big plays. It doesn't play well when it gives up big plays. The secondary is criticized. The secondary plays poorly when it gives up big plays. There's a real correlation there. I mean, that's what we've seen all season long. So don't call me on it, but this Clemson potential for big plays could be the straw that breaks the camel's back in this game.
Well, while we're staying on the throw game, I'll get to this. I mean, obviously, the biggest ally of a secondary is a strong pass rush. And there's no Bosa. There's no Chase Young. Can Ohio State, with its roster of players that it's had, and the different guys kind of stepped up in each game, can they affect Trevor Lawrence enough to keep him off balance and not be able to just pick him apart?
So we've seen all the kind of Pro Football Focus, statistics about the Ohio State pass rush and, how many pressures and hurries that they are getting back there, even if the sack numbers themselves haven't, jumped off the page at you this season in comparison to, what a Chase Young did last year, for example. I just think watching Ohio State, it's very frustrating at times when you're watching a pass rush that always seems to be so close to getting there, but then just they can't, there's just so many times just can't get all the way home on a guy. And I think that could potentially be an issue, when you're trying to get to Trevor Lawrence, especially with his mobility. Even Peyton Ramsey had a couple really nice runs out of the pocket against Ohio State. Adrian Martinez, Luke McCaffrey for Nebraska, had success with that early on as well. Ohio State's going to have to get home rushing the passer, or else, Trevor Lawrence is really going to hurt this defense.
Yeah, I can echo that statement right there. We've seen Jonathan Cooper, we've seen Tyreek Smith, Tyler Friday, and company get so close to that quarterback just for, either a dump off happen or a play happen. And so if Trevor Lawrence feels pressured and he starts scrambling, look for those linebackers to really step up and avoid those little small bit-by-bit pieces and plays, because that ultimately could keep a drive going. And so if Lawrence doesn't get deep, he doesn't throw the ball deep, and that's the secondary, but that pass defense that Ohio State offers can keep pressuring and break into that pocket and blow up plays. That could be a major threat to Clemson's ability to pull it out tomorrow, because Ohio State's linebackers are so experienced, they're so veteran, and they played last year. Pete Warner, Tuff Orland, Darren Browning, and Justin Hilliard's riding a hot game coming out of the Big Ten title game. So that could be the X factor in the role, is those linebackers.
I mean, more than the yardage, more than the first downs, more than all of that, getting a sack or getting a hit on Trevor Lawrence or getting a tackle in the backfield on Travis Etienne, it's momentum. It slows the offense down and makes them think a little bit. Just think about last year. If Sean Wade had landed that sack on Lawrence in the second quarter and wasn't called for targeting, think about where that game's at. That's a momentum-defining play. So if Jonathan Cooper, if Tommy Togiai and Haskell Garrett on the interior are able to break through, get their hands on Lawrence, if one player is able to just get a hit on Trevor Lawrence, maybe rush him out of the pocket, cause a negative play, that can shift momentum. That one play can shift momentum, especially when you're playing against a talent like Lawrence. It makes him think twice. It makes him a little bit rushing in the pocket, wants to get the ball out of his hands. So I think if they want to stop those deep plays, you have to get hands on Lawrence early.
I agree. I think that it means so much to be able to just not allow him to be comfortable. You can't allow him to be comfortable, because once he gets into a rhythm, that's when you're in trouble. And I'm sitting here and I'm looking at their passing numbers throughout the season, and I think in some ways, as we sit there, we're like, well, you got to just slow them down. You can't really stop them. I mean, that makes me look at the Georgia Tech game where they were 33 of 49 for 500 yards and 7 touchdowns. But then I go, a couple weeks ago against Virginia Tech, and they were 12 of 22 for 195 with a touchdown and a pick. So, everybody's going to have good games. Everybody's going to have bad games. I'm not saying that Ohio State's pass defense is equal to Virginia Tech's or whatnot. I mean, of course, I can sit here and look at the numbers right here. And honestly, Virginia Tech is giving up almost as many yards via the pass as Ohio State is, a difference of about 5 yards. And Ohio State actually technically has a little bit of a better pass efficiency defense than the Hokies. So, we can fall in love with the numbers, but you just don't know until you get to the game what's going to happen there. And if Ohio State's able to hit Trevor Lawrence a couple times, within the whistle, nobody's calling for anything that's, chintzy or cheap or whatnot, but within the scope of the game, hit him a couple times, good things can come out of that. But let's turn our tides to the last of the 4 categories, and that's Ohio State's run defense against the Clemson run offense. And we go to the 2019 game, and it wasn't Travis Etienne that hurt them on the ground. It was obviously Trevor Lawrence and his ability to run. And he certainly has that his own read option play system that he's got there to where he can hurt teams. And as we've already kind of talked about, Ohio State's linebacker core, very veteran, but it comes into the question that was asked, has been asked a lot of times over the course of the last 2 weeks. Do you spy Lawrence? Do you do a two safety look? What is the best approach to try and keep Lawrence from beating you with his legs?
Yeah, this is honestly the phase of the game that I'm most confident in about Ohio State. I think after that Nebraska game, ever since that Nebraska game, there have certainly been some moments where it's been concerning, but it's been the area of the defense that's really stepped up the most. I think with the linebacking core, as Jacob said earlier, That's the thing that really kind of relieves some of the pressure, because when the line is getting pressure, maybe Lawrence breaks through. Lawrence is going to break, but those linebackers, they're at the ball. You can say what you want about Toph Borland and Pete Werner, but they're at the ball. Werner's going to make a big third down tackle. Borland's going to be there every time. I mean, there's a reason that they're still here. There's a reason that they're still making plays, leading the team in tackles. They're going to be at the ball when it breaks through the line of scrimmage. And at the line of scrimmage, I mean, you have Haskell Garrett, you have Tommy Togiai. They're two big guys who have taken massive steps forward this season. And I think when you look at every area, there's so much to be a little bit worried about or a little bit questioning about Ohio State's game. I think this is one area where you can say, like, there's some confidence, there's some proven experience here. There's some reason to think that Ohio State will find success early.
Yeah, I don't think that Clemson will necessarily.
Oops.
Go ahead.
There we go.
Okay. So Ohio State
I
is.
think it's a good question to pose. Oh, you're Griffin. Go ahead.
I just
Here,
thought it was
let me get us all on the 4 shot here and see if we can sort this out. All right, go ahead, guys.
Jacob, go ahead.
All right, I got it. It's a great question to ask. How do you contain Trevor Lawrence? I think you got to stop the big play. I believe there were a couple of missed tackles on his big run last year. To make those were avoided, obviously. But it goes back to how we were talking about pass defense. If that defensive line can create pressures and blow up the pocket, that's when Trevor Lawrence is going to scramble. And then it goes back to my point about the linebackers that Marcus brought up. Obviously, I think Trevor Lawrence is going to rely, on making those big plays. And if Ohio State figures out a way to limit Travis Etienne like they did last year, we're going to see Clemson have to force something rather than go with their play call in a sense.
And yeah, what I was going to add there is, Ohio State is 6th in the country, their rush defense, and also Clemson has, I forget what the exact stat is, but they're rushing for a significantly less amount of yardage on average than they have in the past several years. It's like sub 100 yards per game rushing attack. But the reason why why that doesn't give me a ton of confidence for Ohio State, generally speaking, in terms of their likelihood of winning the game or anything like that, is because, okay, so if Ohio State does shut down, let's say, Clemson's just straight up meat and potatoes run game. So does that mean that Clemson is then, passing the ball a lot more? That's what I think everyone's worried about if you're an Ohio State fan in general. So I think, it's expected that Ohio State's going to be good against the run, and I think they need to do that. But, like, if Ohio State's shutting down the Clemson rush attack, I don't think that necessarily means that, Ohio State's shut down Clemson, so they're done. It's not going to be like that. You're going to have all those threats in the pass game in a kind of a weakened secondary that are still going to concern you. So I do expect to see, Haskell Garrett and Tommy Togiai making plays like they have all season, but that's just kind of to be expected at this point.
I want to jump in with another topic here before we start to wrap things up. Let me find it here in my list. Everybody talks about the fact that Ohio State has all this to play for, whatnot, and there's a difference between playing with emotion and playing emotional. How do you shut down the noise that's around you? I mean, we know every year we don't listen to what people are saying outside of the Woody. We just try, we're focused on ourselves or whatnot. But, I mean, Ohio State 0-4 against Clemson, had a game get away from them last year that had some questionable calls, if we're being honest with ourselves. Just a lot of things that are going on. I mean, Ryan Day's only loss as a head coach is to Clemson in this game last year. How do you separate the two to where you play with emotion in a game that could end up being a pretty long game just based on how long breaks are for these college football playoff games, just the style of play and everything? I mean, we're looking at a game that could be 3.5 hours plus or whatnot. And if you come out and you play emotional, you can just exhaust yourself and not be able to show up in the second half. And we've already seen an Ohio State team that maybe doesn't have the same intensity in the second half that it has in the first half.
I think what helps with that is that there isn't a crowd. So I don't know if you're getting quite the same. And I'm obviously not the person to ask about this, so I don't really know. But I would think that you're not getting quite the same adrenaline dump or something like that because you don't have, a crowd that's kind of making you feel those. And I think that's what we've seen from Ohio State sometimes in those second halves where they didn't have the same intensity because they didn't have a crowd, there to do that. Obviously, there are some people in the crowd, on Friday more so than Ohio State's had in the past, but it's still not going to be the same atmosphere as years past. And that's where I think it comes back to. I don't think they shouldn't need that extra motivation anyway. It's going to be hard for them to kind of regulate those emotions. But I don't know. I think they have so much intrinsic. They should have so much intrinsic motivation for this matchup in the first place because of the stakes and the revenge aspect of everything. I don't know. It's hard to quantify exactly, emotion in a game.
It's an incredible question to ask, and I think it's an incredible point that you brought up the fan aspect because I'm just so in tune with the stadiums just because of the season. It's going to be key for Ohio State because they're the ones looked at more so than Clemson that, they've got way more to prove than Clemson does in this game. And I would think they know that by now. And so if they're going to play with emotion, that emotion has to be confidence. Ohio State's supposed to be here. Clemson is supposed to be here. They both took care of business. So why not be confident? They've obviously taken care of business to get here. And, as I said earlier, Shaun Wade echoed it to his secondary. It's got to be something that's echoed throughout, the team as a whole. Because if Ohio State wants to stay in the game, per se, whether they're ahead or behind, just staying in it and playing with confidence rather than, with something to prove or with, maybe a negative connotated look at emotionally played. Ohio State, that's what's going to drag them back if they start playing recklessly in a sense.
I know Ryan Day has talked about it like every single time he talks to the media, but this team has a level of maturity and leadership that I don't know when the last time we've seen in an Ohio State team. You look at every position group. Justin Fields obviously has taken a step forward. He's composed for the most part. We've seen some issues of breakdowns, but he's going to be composed. He's going to be mentally ready. The offensive line with Myers and Davis leading the way, they're composed. They're not going to let their emotions get the best of them. They're going to help Harry Miller and the younger guys move forward. On the defensive side of the ball, you have Cooper and Hilliard, the senior leaders. You have Borland and Werner, who hold down the middle, and they're boring in the best way possible, right? They're not going to let their emotions get the best of them. I think the area where it becomes the most concerning of like playing emotional versus having that drive is in the secondary. Hopefully Shaun Wade can pull those guys together. He can control his own emotions after the ejection last year. And on the offensive line with Harry Miller, we've seen Miller go through his fair share of struggles. And I think this is certainly the biggest game he's had a big role in. And I think if Wyatt Davis and Josh Myers can help calm him down, and if Shaun Wade can pull the secondary together, every other position group on this team has enough leadership and enough maturity that I don't think playing out of control or playing with too much emotion will be an issue here.
I'm going to change the banner one more time, and we're going to end on this question that I'll ask. It's a two-part question, and it seems to be a ruckus down there by Griffin as I bring his mic back online, so we'll have him start here. Ohio State wins the game if it does what? Ohio State loses the game if it does what?
Ohio State wins the game if Justin Fields bounces back and has the type of vintage performance that we saw from him early in the season, and if the Ohio State secondary surprises everyone. Ohio State loses the game, basically the reverse of both of those things. If we see another shaky performance from Justin Fields, and if the Ohio State secondary proves itself to be what I think a lot of people think it is, which is not a great secondary.
For me, Ohio State wins the game if Chris Olave opens that offense back up. They got to improve on how Northwestern held in the Big Ten title game. Ohio State loses the game if Travis Etienne runs wild over that defense, because I think if Travis Etienne opens things up and runs well, Clemson's going to balance it out with passing, and that's how Ohio State loses the game.
Ohio State wins the game if they get to Trevor Lawrence early and often, get a few hits on him, And if the secondary makes enough plays, they don't have to be perfect, don't have to make all the plays, makes enough plays to keep this defense in the game. Ohio State loses the game if we've seen in games past, the front line can't reach Trevor Lawrence. They're just on the verge of reaching Trevor Lawrence. And Ohio State gets continually burnt in the secondary like we saw Michael Penix do against Indiana.
And I guess I'll wrap it up here, and at risk of repeating people, Ohio State wins the game if it's able to get a pass rush, if it's able to hit Trevor Lawrence a couple times, if it's able to keep him a little antsy, if he hears the footsteps through the game, Ohio State wins the game. Ohio State doesn't win the game if Justin Fields doesn't learn how to live to fight another play. If he tries to extend plays too long, if he goes out there and tries to make these Herculean efforts and throw the ball across his body, across the field, and into harm's way, Ohio State loses the game. But, that's kind of where I'm at with it, and I think that's where everybody is. And we will do one of these after the game. They're going to kick us out of the press box pretty quick, so it might be back from the hotel setting. So we'll see how we can figure all that out. But I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Griffin, Marcus, and Jacob for all being part of the show. I want to thank all of you for watching, either watching us live or who will come back in and watch it off of replay. And, of course, I want to thank our friends at Steamboat Dry Goods for being our travel partner. For everybody involved, thanks a lot, and we will talk to you very soon.